Okay, we're live. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Caroline. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to express a very warm welcome to all of you and thank you for coming to this meeting, which is in fact part 2 of our February Corporate Parenting Board meeting. As you know, we decided to make this into 2 parts because the agenda was rather long. So this is part 2. We've already looked at March's agenda, March the 17th, and hopefully that will be one meeting, which will be the normal trend. Without any more ado, we'll start on the agenda. And our first item is apologies for absence. Susie, would you like to take us through any apologies, please?
Thank you, Chair. We have apologies from Councillor High and Councillor Thompson, and we have a few officer apologies as well, Chair, which I'll go through. We've got apologies from Rob Brown, Rachel Farnham, Tony Parkinson, Laurie Hunter, and Gail Earl. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. And before we launch into the agenda, I will just say that we also have apologies from Helen Scourfield from the Family Youth Justice Board, who was going to present item 4, but due to an illness, she cannot be with us this afternoon. So she's going to come in March on the 17th. And I therefore took the opportunity to add 2 items of any other business onto the agenda. One is a brief overview of the Philomena Protocol. Another one is an opportunity to look at the action plan for the board and just to look more closely in any details on that. And the third one is my spotlight plea. That's just a quick addition. So there are 3 things under any other business. So we'll start then by declarations of interest this afternoon. Have we got any? No? Oh, Rob, hello, Rob. I think your apologies went in, but there you are. Thank you. So no declarations of interest. So let's move to item 3, where we have Nikki, and you can introduce yourself with your title, Nikki, if that's okay, please. And we have Wendy, and we have Carly. So we have the 3 of them presenting issues concerning the mental health of young people and children looked after. So are we starting with you, Nikki, this afternoon?
Can do, yeah, I don't mind. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
I'm quite happy if everybody's happy for me to do my short presentation, which I believe
yes, thank you,
Susie's
yes.
kindly going to.
We did have the presentation circulated, thank you, so that's very good.
Great.
Would you prefer that people ask questions during the presentation, or shall we wait to the end and then it's easier to see everyone's hand, actually, for me to see the hand?
Yes, yeah, at the end would be useful if that's okay, and then hopefully...
That's absolutely fine.
Brilliant.
We'll go with that, thank you. Thank you, Nikki.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
No, you're welcome, thank you. So hopefully everybody can hear me. Thank you for inviting me. I hope I've got the right context for the presentation. Susie kindly emailed me to ask if I would do something really around for the board around initial and review health assessments in relation to children in care. So I've given a general context around the health input, because I'm sure that Carly and people will do more of the detail around kind of the mental health, emotional health and well-being. So I've done very much a whistle-stop tour, if you like, for what the health input is into the children in care's pathway, really, from when they come into care, which I did share the slides with you. Are they being shared as part of this now?
They are, Nikki. I'm just trying to get them onto the screen. Just bear with me.
Sorry,
2 seconds. I'm just trying to get them on. 1 second.
Probably be using those as a bit of a prompt from what I can remember, because it was a while ago since I did them, but great, lovely, super. People see those okay?
Thank you. Yes, Nikki, that's fine now. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. So all I've really done is give like I say, a review of assessments and what the health input is required into this statutory duty, really. So obviously any questions at the end are more than happy to take. So a little review around initial health assessments. Obviously when a child comes into care, the various things are offered, but health assessment is an integral part of that. And they're offered for all children entering care, and they have to be completed within set timescales, as I'm sure some of you are aware. And part of this is a general health screen, which is absolutely vitally important. And there's always been an issue around seeing a dentist versus registration with a dentist. It's very clear that they have to be registered with a GP and a dentist. We encourage them to be seen, obviously, But there have been some issues around actually even dentists taking on the child from a registration point of view, let alone seeing them. So it was really around having those discussions, making sure that they are registered with a dentist and a GP, and that any unmet health needs are escalated appropriately, really managed via any onward referrals, or they could be managed locally within the the specialist teams and areas. So it's really important at that initial health screen, but also at the review, really get a grasp of what the child's health needs are, and within that obviously becomes their emotional health and wellbeing needs as well as their physical needs. So next slide please. Review health assessments obviously become part of the process, and they're offered 6 months post an initial if the child is under 5 years old. So 2 assessments a year for any child under 5, and then annually for a child over 5. And the reviews again look at all aspects of the previous assessment and action any outstanding health needs. For example, if they're still not been able to be registered with a dentist, or haven't been seen by an optician if that's required, and really any gaps in that health assessment that's missing is where the links with our local health authority, and our health colleagues really come to the fore. It's where's the gap? What can we do about it? How can we encourage even the families to actually get the carers to get those children registered properly? Across Tees Valley, but also nationally, the access to a dentist is still an issue. NHS England are doing a piece of work around just that, to get dentists to understand some of their kind of duties, to understand what a child in care's health needs are, because we know that they're extremely vulnerable. We know they've usually got an element of neglect, unfortunately, whether that's a dental health neglect or other. So there's a piece of work being done currently with the designated network and NHS England dental lead for the North East on information sharing, really getting them to understand about children in care's needs. So those things will be reported back accordingly. And again, the assessment should form any gaps in service provision which can support any kind of JSNA or a service provision or a health strategy, which the commissioners may not be aware of or may be, and we just need to support them with further evidence around that. Thank you. Next slide, please. Health passports, again, it's been really a statutory requirement that any child age 14 plus, but certainly those, sorry, there's a typo there, I forgot to reread that. So it should say health passport for those leaving care to have this health passport. They should be offered to every child. The issue is sometimes that the child doesn't necessarily want to take them at the time. It might not be the right time for them to engage again. But ultimately, that child that's particularly leaving care or is moving into a transition into another service needs to be able to access that health passport. So it gives them all of their detail around any long-term conditions they may have, what their current health status is, what their vaccination status is, and they have to be offered the usual route to make them available to the care leaver if they're not taken up and the social worker hasn't been able to give them the passport, is that they go to the GP as almost like a central repository, so that if they child wants that health passport in the future, they can actually ask the GP for that evidence in that health summary that they get. Thank you. Next one. So I've put a little bit obviously about the Middlesbrough landscape that I was aware of, but this isn't just pertinent to Middlesbrough. Actually, a lot of this landscape is fairly national, certainly very local. The statutory timescales have shown a steady decline in compliance, and that's really not just because of, well, mainly because of COVID at the moment, but actually there's been a national, unfortunately, standard decline, really because of refusal of children to have the assessment, and if they've got the capacity, obviously they can decline. The big one at the moment, particularly in the last quarter, is the failure for the child to be brought to the appointment. We call them was not brought by the carer, or actually in certain cases they've been placed back with the family, with the parents, and there is a higher at the moment, not huge numbers, but the evidence is there that they are not being brought to that first appointment if they've been placed back with their parents as care in their care, which is an interesting point. And again, that's been broached both locally and nationally as becoming a little bit of an issue, and that's being monitored. And the other issue is the outstanding consent for assessment and medical from the parent, which is via the social work and social care. So obviously there has to be consent in order for the health professional to actually undertake the medical. It's worth noting that the small numbers of children in care per month and just 1 or 2 appointments not attended, but obviously that can impact on the total compliance percentage that the CCG ultimately get within their data pack from our colleagues in the local authority and our health teams, children in care teams that actually do the assessment. So it's worth we make sure that we actually do scrutinise the data in quite a lot of detail, and templates have been set up in order to understand the narrative behind the high or low compliance figures, so that we can work with our colleagues to encourage the children to be brought in basically for their assessments in a timely manner. Thank you. The next, local needs versus national needs. I did touch base on quite a few of these, and again it's interesting that Middlesbrough, Redcar, Tees Valley, they're not alone in this picture. Lack of NHS dentist spaces, but also lack of understanding, which I mentioned, and some cases their duty. Some of these, it's a bit like some of the GPs, their contracts is the general basic contracts don't allow for what these are seen as enhanced contracts. So these are enhanced services to children and families that are outside of an NHS standard dental or GP contract. So a lot of the issue is actually that there's a lack of understanding, but there's also probably a lack of kind of goodwill, and particularly in the current climate, quite rightly, everybody is being very COVID centric, which is understandable. So a lot of these others are kind of put on the back burner. But this again is both locally and nationally, the NHS and primary care leads and primary care networks are very aware of this, and we're trying to work towards changing some of the models of provision and accessibility, as well as making sure that as we come out of the pandemic, that we're still offering a degree of almost like business as usual for some of these children. So there's work going on in the background in that. In some areas, there's removal of dedicated children and adolescent mental health pathways, specifically for children in care. When statutory guidance first came out, it was very clear that where possible, an actual pathway should be set up specifically for children to be referred in to adolescent mental health services, because obviously they were seen as high need. There was a high level of anxiety, quite rightly, because they were very vulnerable. They'd moved into a new placement they weren't aware of, been wrenched from their family environment. So these cases, and in these cases, evidence required that the children will still need to be seen. So there's some areas where they're integrating the triage pathway, where they won't be children in care won't be discriminated. They're just offering them different forms of access and also different levels of service before they get into what we would call tier 3 CAMS, which is the real detailed, where they need a lot of therapy, a lot of input, very regular psychiatric CPN input. So they're trying to look at lower, earlier intervention stages in order to support these children, and that research has shown that actually, as most people will understand, early intervention in any aspect of that child's journey is only going to come out as a positive for them at the end. So, and also with the Royal College of Paediatricians and intercollegiate colleges, guidance supports greater emphasis on specialist children in care roles. So we have specialist health teams that are for children in care. What the new guidance is supporting is greater emphasis on their role around quality and outcomes, and to audit cases and to audit and support very much more clearly the gaps in service, to be very much more strategic driven around what some of these gaps in service are requiring. Thank you. Next slide. Not sure that I've got too many more. Hopefully, I think that's yeah. So I've done a little bit of this is very much an overview of obviously mental health for children in care, and obviously it's usually the issue from the beginning when the child's first taken And obviously as part of that assessment, they're given an SDQ, which is a strengths and difficulties questionnaire, but that's usually further down 6 months to a year if they're in long-term care, because obviously they need to settle into their new home, they need to get used to the foster family, and the strengths and difficulties questionnaire gives then a flavour of how this child is really coping within their environment, within their new structure. And if a referral into CAMHS obviously is required, then the health team and social workers make sure this has occurred. SDQs are scored, apologies, I'm telling people to grandma to suck eggs here, but there are certain levels of scoring around a questionnaire, and obviously a high score warrants a very different intervention to a low score. And these are monitored very clearly by the social worker and the health team around what input this child might need in order to reduce their strengths and support their strengths, but reduce their difficulties that they're experiencing. And they generally ask the question quite rightly is, what else is out there to support the child? They might have a good relationship with the pastoral support within their school. It's all those things about getting the holistic assessment to really fit around that child when they've come into care at what was going to be a traumatic time for them when they first come in. And if they're placed in if they have quick turnover of placements as well, if the placement's broken down, again, you've got another layer really of difficulty for that child to cope with. So that's next slide, please. I think that's me just about finished. I'm not sure. Sorry. Oh, right. Yes. So I've done a little bit really just about the strengths and difficulties questionnaire, who developed it, really what it's used for. Nationally, it's used on the whole. People still find it quite useful as an indicator of how this child is coping. There are other tools, of course, but from the children in care point of view and promoting the health and well-being, this is still kind of a tool that most of the health teams are aware of and they use a lot. And there's obviously, I've just put a link in there for anybody that wanted any more detailed information around. There's different age ranges of questionnaire, so just to obviously suit the experience and the voice of the child at that age. So, but it's quite a useful link if anybody wanted to have a look at that for further information. And just again, just really a list of documents that are very relevant, particularly to health, around the children in care. And again, there are links in there if people wish to have some bedtime reading. I think that's me done, I believe. Yes. So obviously any questions, more than happy to take them. If I can answer them, I will.
Thank you very much, Nikki. That was a very comprehensive overview. And thanks for the references. I think it'll be interesting to follow up on some of the questionnaires and the other documents that you refer to there. Sure. So I think we have quite a lot of questions potentially. And already I can see Councillor Walker's hand. Are there any others for now? Councillor Walker, Councillor Udin, okay, and Councillor Higgins. I can see 3, and Mr. Snowball. Fine, right. I'll stop at 4 for now, and I'll go to Councillor Walker, please, to ask your question of Nikki. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Chair. I was just picking up on the point where you said that there's a general decline. I think it is November 2020. Regarding the children being taken to appointments, which is it's quite worrying, actually. I mean, 55 to 60%. What's the age? Is there a specific age range, or is it the very young children, or is it the teenage? You know what I mean? Is there a correlation between that information? I'm just wondering.
So the information that we receive, Councillor Walker, has been very much gone through a process where it's kind of cleansed and the narrative has been again picked up. There is a real mix, to be fair, from the data that I've seen. There's no definitive age range. Now I'm talking much more, not just across Middlesbrough. I'm talking about kind of a more of a national picture. I see Paula's got her hand up there. So she can very much look. The figures as well I quoted last November, and that was very clear what I had in November. Things have moved on since then. I think it's fair to say that that's increased, fortunately, the IHA numbers, and that have increased again. and it's been a real mix as to why that was. You've got the impact of COVID and sickness on the people that can do the assessments. You have got, quite rightly, the parents, even the foster carers, being quite unsure, about bringing them in because, again, of the COVID situation. But in fairness, and to be, to put it into context, there are, this has become a pattern, and it happens occasionally every kind of year or so. We'll get there where there'll be a dip again for various reasons as to why they're not being brought in. A lot of it is they're just, foster carers might forget the appointment, because they've been so busy with other things. They genuinely, the older children particularly, refuse to come. They refuse to take up that appointment offer, particularly the teenage, the ones, the older adolescents that have gone into care. So it's a real mix, actually.
Right.
Paula might be able to give some
I think Paula, yes,
greater
could I bring
figures.
Paula in, please? Would you like to add something, Paula? Thank you.
So you're
Thank
waving
you.
your hand there.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to draw Board's attention to the fact that I know Nicola's already mentioned the fact that there's been significant improvements, but in December and January we had 100% of children who had become looked after that attended their initial health assessment within the time scale. So we're seeing significant improvements, and I think we've got new strategies in place to have additional oversight of that. So I feel confident that things will continue to improve.
Which is good, because we didn't have that. I think it is fair to say that, various colleagues, we didn't have that oversight or that narrative behind it before in detail as to the rationale as to why they weren't being in and coming in time or weren't attending. And that was sometimes, some of that was due to how the data was being collected and then sent ultimately to our colleagues and ourselves in the CCG. So we developed better narrative templates from the point of view of understanding the rationale as to why they weren't brought in. Also better pathways to ensure that the families are followed up, to make sure, and it's imperative that they are brought to the assessment. And we are doing some further work. I know Paula is leading on it, around actually offering the carers and the parents, even having the children in care, what the assessments look like, what will they expect when they get there, because I think some of it is lack of knowledge, and some of it is that they are really unsure, regardless of COVID, what might be on offer to that child when they come in. So a lot of it is information gathering, a lot of it is also information sharing to ensure that they are comfortable and confident when that child is brought in for the assessment.
Thank you, Nikki. I think Sue, before I bring in anyone else, Sue, did you want to add to that? Sue Butcher, I think I saw your hand.
Just to say, actually, it's a good idea to separate, and maybe we need to look at that, those young people who have decided that they don't want a health assessment, because it's a young person's right, isn't it? If you're 16, for example, why do you want to be, stethoscoped by a GP or whoever, at that age, because yourself. So I think we need to look at separating, whatever the figures, I'm just making these up, 50% did, but 10% are, exercising their right not to come, because I think it's important to do that. So anyway, that's just my quick point.
No, absolutely fair point, Sue, and it's something that we are working on, because you're absolutely right. We also need to know the repeat offenders as well. That sounds awful, but there are some mixed ages where there are genuine, for want of a better phrase, frequent flyers, repeat offenders. So we also need to look at that, and we aren't good at that, I think, across the board, but certainly in health we need to look at that breakdown, because we do actually, as you know, coordinate those assessments, so we should be able to have the capacity to do some of that breakdown.
That's a good idea. Thank you. I think that would help to look at the statistics more clearly and we'd understand them better.
Can I add on to that? Can I add on to that, Chair, please? I just wondered, because if we are going to get that in depth, because that would be very helpful to see the pattern emerging. And as you said, I mean, I've had teenage children myself, and many of us have, and it is difficult because they are not going. There's nothing wrong with me, and of course, that can be very difficult, and I appreciate that. However, it is something that I think Sue has quite picked up on as well, and I think we need to see what the difference is, so that we can actually judge it properly. Because, as you said, if there are frequent flyers, as you call them, in a certain age bracket, I think it'd be silly of us not to pick up on that and ensure that the children are being looked at, because let's be honest, the health of the child it can be the mental health, emotional health, and the physical health all go towards looking after that child. So it's very important that we know what's happening as the whole holistic look. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank
Nikki,
you.
did you want? No, thank you. I think it's Councillor Udin now. Thank you, Zafar.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks very much. I'd just like to ask a question, Nicola. You mentioned about the health passport.
Yeah.
What's included in the health passport and who looks after it? And where does it
Sure.
go?
Yeah, so the health passport is basically an abridged version of the child's health right from when they came into care. So it contains vaccinations, a vaccination programme. It contains any long-term or short-term conditions that they may have had or been treated for. And it also looks at their things like their BMI, whether they're obese or underweight, etc. Any primary care, primary health, public health needs as well that they might be used to. It might be that there's a teenager and they've been encouraged to stop smoking. They may have been smoking. So it contains kind of all of the health interactions and health background that child has. Now, as they leave care or as they transition into the next phase of their care, they are offered, certainly should start be looking at 14, but at 16 they're offered that health passport, and that is they can be varying formats, but they're usually literally a little kind of passport style booklet that contains all of their personal confidential information, which is discussed and shared with them, and they take that away with them as their life health passport that they can add to as they wish. There are some again who have not engaged for various reasons, have left care at 16, but there is still a duty for that health information to be available. So the actual repository for that is actually that child's registered GP. So that information should be available at the GP should they want to access that at a later date.
Thank you. Is that okay, Zafar?
Yeah, that's okay. Thank you. Like I was saying as well, does it go to in any way to the foster carers if they are, they looked at obviously, plus the GP and social workers?
So yeah, so the health passport obviously is ultimately belongs to that child because it's their information. They can choose to share it, particularly if they're old enough to understand. They can choose to share that information with who they wish. The GP is the ultimate holder of that information because a lot of it is usually on their health record. But if they want to share it with the carers, or if they move into other accommodation or even into a relationship, it's really for them to share in the manner that they see fit. The initial and review health assessments tend to be the ones that should be shared and discussed with the parents and all the foster carers and the child. That then formulates moving forward some of the input into that health passport as they leave care.
Thank you, Nikki.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you. So I'll just go to Councillor Higgins and then Mr. Snowball. I've seen your hand. So I'll go to Teresa first. Thank you, Teresa.
Thank you, Chair. Like Councillor Walker, I was concerned at the beginning of your information about some foster children not taking up, the dentist appointments and the doctor's appointments. And you said you just put a no-show. So is there any more information to say why a child hasn't attended? It could have been sorry, go on.
Sorry to butt in, Councillor. So there's two issues. The first issue is that they have to be registered with the GP and a dentist. And obviously, as then the standard requirement then would be, depending on the dental practice, is how often the dentist is, they go to the dentist, but they should have at least an initial assessment at the dentist to see what obviously their dental hygiene's like, etc., etc. And then hopefully they would follow the advice of the dentist from the point of view of then having those regular checkups. But the issue is a lot of the time there aren't enough dentists to take on that child's registration. So that's kind of first aspect. If there's anywhere we're still concerned, then, and not just ourselves, but our health colleagues and the social workers, we'd try and we'd get together and decide on really the best option and the best fit. And it might be that we contact a particular practice, a dental practice, where we know that they, even though it's not widely known, that they will actually see that child because they're a child in care. So there are ways of kind of dealing with that. But what we haven't got is a really, for want of an argument, a real strong national strategy on that, you know, on that registration and that take up for these children.
Right. And that's the national. The local strategy, can we say, have you got something that shows the improvement or shows the child's progression, and say, you know, like say, they didn't turn up that day because the foster carer forgot or she was too busy? Is there something, because we could do with knowing how many children this is affecting?
Yeah, so
particularly with the dentists, because we could do something as a council, I would hope, to make sure that the local children are getting what they deserve and what our children get.
Yeah.
So I need to know that there's some way where you can look at, you know, Johnny from down the road, and he never went to 3 appointments, and why?
Yeah,
well,
so that,
you know, and is he foster caring, or is he in a home, a children's home?
sure. So picking up on your point, Councillor, that's exactly what kind of Sue and Paula and myself were discussing around, having that real breakdown as to rationale as to why they're not attending, and what we can do about it. And we're working on that. It's not by any means detailed in that sense, but we are aware of some of these gaps, and we need to understand absolutely why they're not attending and what we can offer them, you know, as an alternative, or like you say, locally, are there certain dentists that we need to target to ensure that they get to see them? So the narrative and the understanding behind that is still something that we're work in progress, but we are getting much better at recording the rationale and the outcome as to why they weren't able to go, or they didn't go.
And how,
Thank you.
can I just?
I think Carly wants to come in though, Teresa. She may be able to give a different perspective. Is that right, Carly, on this particular question? And then I'll bring you back in, Teresa. We'll see what Carly says, if that's okay. Carly.
Thank you. The review health assessments which are carried out would identify if the children haven't seen a dentist or aren't registered with a dentist, and that information would be kind of explored with the child or young person and the carer or the parent, depending on where the placement was. So if there was an outstanding health need, regardless of what it was, we would identify what that was and we would come up with an action plan. So we would have a health outcome, and then we would have specific actions of what we would do to ensure that that was going to happen. So that would kind of link in with what Nicola was explaining, you know, about kind of how we might use different strategies and contact surgeries to ensure a child accesses that assessment. But it wouldn't be just left, you know, we would actively pursue that. So they would go on a waiting list and it would be followed up. So it would be a little bit like a reminder, and we would check to see that that had happened. That's just to give you a little bit reassurance that it's nothing happens, if that makes sense at all.
Well, yeah,
thank you. Teresa, does that help?
Thank you. Well, yes, because Nicola said that they would it's a work in progress, and I
think it's fair to say that some of it is work in progress around getting the data that we need properly, and to ensure that everybody is actually, like Carly said, putting the information in the appropriate format so that we're aware of some of the outcomes. So it is, from the CCG point of view, there's certainly stuff that we still need to make sure that we can get hold of as well, to be fair.
Thank you. I can see, just for information, that Mr. Snowball's next, and then Councillor Nugent and Councillor McTighe. So I've seen those hands now. So I'll go to Mr. Snowball. Carl, I've seen your hand, Mary. I've noted it down. Carl, would you like to come in?
Yeah, hi Nicola.
Hello.
I'm just to present myself. If you like, I am on the board as a foster carer, so that's my
Okay.
representation. That's my representation, if you like, on the board.
Great.
So I picked up a few points really from your presentation. So if I mention them all and then rather than separately, there's only a few. Well, the first one was really around sort of the IHAs and your timescales, and whether they'd been affected in any way around sort of COVID and the pandemic and rules around that. So whether those timescales had the hitting the 15 days or 20 days was practicable. The other thing is, as a foster carer, my wife and I do babies. So we've had babies from birth, if you like, where sometimes they haven't been registered. The births haven't been registered for 12 weeks, however many weeks, and what implications that has. And then the third item, and then it's just a last thing after that. The third really was around sort of the genetics. We know from some of our children that we've fostered and have moved on. There's occasion where there's missing history around parentage or whatever, and it's just a genetic element around health and that passport for that child and what's known and what isn't known. And then finally, just picking up really just some of the conversations that just happened there. A few people have mentioned around sort of foster carers, and perhaps the foster carer hasn't taken them or what have you. I can't speak for foster carers. I'm not here to do that. But unless we're presenting with data, and the data might well be there that foster carers haven't presented, and I'm prepared to take that. But this has been live streamed, and I don't want whoever's listening out there to be it's the foster carers' fault because they haven't turned up with the child. So can we put that one to bed and say present me with the information, but don't blame, just in this case, necessarily foster carers for it. The child not being there.
Can I come back in there, Chair? Just to clarify the fact that I wasn't blaming foster carers. All I was saying is we need to know why those children weren't keeping those appointments. Right? Thank you.
I appreciate that. No, it wasn't just you, Teresa. It's been mentioned across a few people where they've said the foster carer might not have taken them or whatever, or she wasn't bothered, or and so it was a general theme, and that's where I was coming from.
Thank you, Mr. Snowball. Nikki, would you like to come back in on that area of questioning?
Yes, certainly. So going back to your first point, Councillor Snowball, sorry, could you, right at the beginning, I've got the back bit around the foster carers, and I absolutely get that. Could you just repeat the first aspect of your
the first one was just really about the IHAs, and you had timescales of 15 days and what have you, and how that was affected. Yeah.
I think, fortunately, not just for Middlesbrough, but across on the whole, they've been well met. There've been very few that have been outside of timescale, and the ones that have the two main reasons have been sickness due to COVID. So unfortunately, the health professional hasn't been able to then undertake that, and the other reason has been the delay in the consent for the child to be seen. So very fortunately, and again, particularly in Middlesbrough, but also across Tees Valley, there hasn't been any, certainly in this last quarter, but any significant impact. They've worked really, really hard, and that's been on the whole face-to-face, hopefully for the initials, with COVID safe, secure environments, and some of the review health assessments in particular have been done virtual format as well as face-to-face. So they've been extremely supportive and extremely creative around making sure that these children have still been seen and engaged. So from that point of view, there hasn't been actually the significant impact that I think myself and a lot of colleagues thought there might be, where they were stopping a lot of the service provision, or they were changing the direction of the service provision. And absolutely, this is one of the essential ones that needed to continue. It was how best that could really be continued. So that's a real positive, and on the whole, that's been really well met by certainly the health colleagues, particularly in acute hospitals, for all the other pressures they've had, as well as our looked after health teams that have been based at the hospital or out in the community. So I think from that point of view, they can only be applauded for the work that they've done to try and keep those standards up. And even, as I think I mentioned before, some of these issues were actually pre-COVID. So it's actually about what can we still do in the longer term still engage with these families and children to make sure that they come. And I think certainly from Paula's point of view and meetings we've had, again, it might be down to the simple fact of what to expect. You know, what are they going to see when they get to the assessment? You know, certainly the initial, because it's the first thing they'll have witnessed and seen. But yeah, so that's been really a positive from that point of view. There's been very little major impact that hasn't been resolved. Although they've fallen possibly out of time scale, it's not that they've not ultimately been seen in some way.
Thank you. I think could I bring Paula in now? She just wanted to add something, I think, to that particular answer. Is that right, Paula?
It is, thank you, Chair. I just wanted to add a little bit about review health assessments. Our current performance in terms of timeliness for review health assessments is 90% across the looked after service. And I also just wanted to mention a little bit about some work that we've been doing as part of the improvement journey. Myself and Nicola have been involved in the start of a task and finish group that are looking at children's emotional health at the point of entry into care. So we're looking at different models to assess children's mental health at an earlier point so that they can access emotional and mental health services in a more timely way, because like Nicola mentioned, we've got our SDQ, which is our strength and difficulty questionnaire, but that's not completed with a looked after child until between 6 and 12 months after they're looked after. So there is other work that's ongoing at the moment to try and strengthen the work to support children's physical and emotional health.
Thank you, Paula. That's very helpful. Mr. Snowball, does that cover your points?
Yeah. The first one I would say, I just wondered about sort of the registration, the birth registration, and the genetics side of things. Whether that, as I say, that has an issue around our children.
So the actual registration, the GP registration, do you mean? Sorry.
Birth, well, no, but from our perspective, really birth. So some of our babies don't get registered. Birth isn't registered by parent or whoever is going to do it ultimately. For
right.
It can be 12 weeks or so. So
right.
To hit your 15-week deadline would be almost an impossibility.
Yes. Yeah. Well, 15 days actually.
15 days,
yeah.
Sorry, yeah.
Yeah, no. I actually personally wasn't aware. This is just me as wasn't aware that was. I don't know whether Carly can pick up on that with the. I wasn't personally aware that was an issue. The issue in general was just GPs not taking on, registration. So I wasn't aware that registering their actual birth and then going to the GP was actually an issue. But if that's something that people have highlighted, particularly yourself.
No, I just don't know. No, just quick, it is an issue. Sorry, I didn't know whether it was an issue rather than it is an issue. If it's not an issue, then it's fine.
No, I think the actual birth registration and also the initial registration doesn't seem to be that. It's almost the longer term. Or if a child, which I'm sure you know, we've been a foster care, if they're placed from another local authority or whatever, then there's sometimes some discussions need to be had around GP and re-registration or temporary registration, that sort of thing, really. But no, I wasn't aware that the birth registration was an issue.
Yeah, the other thing I just raised as a sort of a point, which I'm aware of, that is, like I say, is that medical history that's sometimes missing from some of our children because of unknown parentage, etc.
Yeah, that's right, and it does rely a lot on, quite rightly, a lot on the parents filling in the initial history form, particularly on the older child. If the child's a bit older, one would hope the initial assessment picks up the need for some of these possibly these genetic referrals, etc. So it is very much dependent on the child as the initial assessment medic sees them when they come into care. So there are absolutely, and it's not perfect in any way, shape or form. There are going to be some gaps sometimes in these health passports or the health history, but it's a case of working at the time sometimes on the information, like you say, that you've got and you've been given. So
thank you, Nikki. Thanks for the excellent questions. I'm just a little bit aware of the time because we're going to have Wendy, Kelly and Carly Dodsworth, but I've got a question from Mary Nugent, Councillor Nugent, and Councillor McTighe and Councillor Uddin. And then I've seen your hands, Zaffa, that's fine, I've made a note. And then we'll move on, I think, to Wendy. Okay, so I'm handing over to Mary for your question, please. Councillor Nugent.
Yes, it's been mentioned that a lot of young people decline to attend these assessments. Could I ask, at what age is that, can that be accepted? And so that if they were forced to attend assessments in any way, would it impact on their human rights? What age is it acceptable for them perhaps not to attend assessments?
Well, picking up on Sue's point, certainly the older child, the adolescent, especially if they've got the capacity, they have a right not to attend.
Right.
So then we have to work with them, and certainly Carly's team in the reviews would work with them to try and engage them and understand why they don't want to come. Obviously, the younger the child, the more likely they are to attend, to be fair, because the carers are excellent at bringing them. So it's really, we're talking certainly from sometimes 12, 13, sometimes younger if they've got and generally don't want to come. But it's really about then what mechanisms, what do we put in place, what tools do we have at our disposal to support them really to come for that assessment, because it's for ultimately it's for their benefit, and we want to see it as a positive for them.
Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you. And now, Councillor McTighe, over to Joan. Thank you, Joan.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and through you. Can I ask, when our children are taken into care, or whether it be children's home or these wonderful foster carers, or even adoption, or possibly not adoption, are we made aware of who their GP is and who their dentist is? If we had that on record, then we could check ourselves to see if the children are being taken regularly for these all-important appointments. I don't know, we may already have that information, but if we don't, why do we not go down that route? Thank you, Chair.
Sorry, so the GP, the basic demographics, including the GP who they're registered with, would be part of the assessment and the paperwork that's gathered. So if we've been made aware that they weren't registered with a suitable GP, as Carly said earlier on, we would encourage them and make sure that action is undertaken, so that they do have that registration with the GP, because there is an expectation that all their initial primary care needs would be picked up by the GP. So I would be, there's very few cases that I'm aware of, and Carly, do correct me if I'm wrong, where we wouldn't have that knowledge that they are registered at least with the GP. The issue sometimes, again, is unfortunately them, that they're not attending, but actually they should be registered with that GP and a dentist. So we do have that information, and that's where Carly was saying that she would pick that up on a review. Even before the review, the reminder would be, it appears you've still not been seen or registered with the dentist or whatever. So how can we help you to achieve that?
No, what I meant was, can I just clarify this? Sorry, Chair, can I just clarify? Are we notified that they are registered with somebody, or are we notified of the full details of who the register is with? That's what I mean. That's what I'm trying to establish.
So we're registered. Yeah, we would know who the GP is if that's what you're asking. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. Sorry.
So we could.
Do know the GP details. Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah. So we, in fact, could check directly with the GP. Could we not?
What?
As to whether the child is, getting the correct medical treatment, is getting regular look at, go to a
absolutely.
Check.
Absolutely.
Thank you. That's fine. That's all I wanted to know.
Sorry, I went slightly off track there. I apologise.
That's all right. Okay, thank you. I think I saw your hand, Paula. Did you want to clarify this question for Councillor McTighe and the rest of us? Thanks.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I just wanted to clarify that as part of the social work assessment, that is a holistic assessment, so it would include up-to-date information from the school nurse and the GP and the health service.
Thank you, Paula. That's clear now, isn't it? Yes. Councillor Odin, we'll take the last question and then we'll move on to the presentation from Wendy. So, Zafar, please. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, I've got a small question, but before that, can I just clarify a little issue with Mr. Snowball, please, about the foster carers? As far as I understand from this discussion today, nobody were blaming foster carers, and I mentioned foster carers very first because I know our foster carers do a great job. They do a fantastic job. Above all, they know a lot more or less a lot of professionals around. For example, GP and social worker even.
Chair,
Because
I believe Mr.
they look
Snowball
after-
has already clarified this, and it's
You
really
know-
important that we make progress with this corporate parent
Yeah,
report.
I am trying to
I
make
don't
the progress
understand why
here.
we are once again going
Excuse
back
me, Councillor
over.
Wright, can we just allow Councillor Udin to finish his point?
No,
Thank
because
you, Councillor.
Mr. Snowball's already answered it.
Okay, well, he's just finishing his point. Thank you. And he's entitled to give his opinion. Thank you.
What I said there, I mentioned that because they do a great job and they do need to see this passport, health passport. That's what I meant, basically. But the point I want to make, just Nicola, regarding CAM's appointment, how long the average waiting list for the appointments with the CAMs?
Oh gosh, Paula, can you remember we were looking at that information? Sorry, I've seen so much information. I don't want to give the wrong one for Middlesbrough. Can you remember offhand what this is one of the reasons why we're trying to work on this early intervention stuff, isn't it? Because there was an issue with the timescale. I personally can't remember. I don't want to give the wrong information around weeks. Carly, do you know offhand? I mean, it does vary from, certainly anything depending on need, if you like, and how it's been triaged. Some services are waiting sort of 12, 16, 18 weeks, if not longer, before they're actually seen. I've just come from an area where, even though they're reviewing the service, there is a 26-week wait for them to be seen in a true pathway. So I can certainly go away and look at that, because I haven't got the up-to-date information, so I wouldn't want to give you anything false for Middlesbrough.
Okay,
That's
thank you.
fine.
Nikki,
Okay,
we can get back to that then with
Yeah.
a different answer.
Yeah.
We'll come back to that in an
Yeah.
email. Thank you subsequently. So I think we'll move on now, please, to Wendy Kelly, who's from CAMS and the Head Start Programme Manager. So Wendy, we did receive and read your very interesting presentation, please. Would you like us to look at it now while you highlight some of the main aspects of that, and then we'll take questions at the end, if that's okay?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. I'll just share the presentation. Can I just point out, I actually don't work for CAMS, I work for South East Public Health.
All right, well, we'll have that amended on our notes. Thank you very much for that clarification. Thanks, Wendy. I've got CAMS down. I beg your pardon. Sorry.
No bother. Sorry about that. I've got a bit of a problem with my internet connection. I've turned my camera off. Thank you, everybody. My name is Wendy Kelly and I'm the CAMS Transformation and Head Start Programme Manager for Public Health. And tonight I just wanted to sort of introduce Head Start to you, really, just talk about the underlying principles. And in particular, I was asked to talk about the approach to COVID and the support that we've been given to schools. So Head Start, the programme, was established in Middlesbrough in 2013, and it was a response to the government's Future in Mind policy, which gave local areas some recommendations to improve the way that young people accessed support for their emotional wellbeing and mental health. Head Start is based on the evidence-based resilience framework. It's an early intervention and preventative approach. And we work in all schools and colleges across South Tees. Up until last year, we were a Middlesbrough-based programme, but since April of last year, we now work across Redcar and Cleveland as well. So in Middlesbrough, we work in every single school and college bar one school, which we will crack eventually, but unfortunately, we've still got that one school we don't work with. And we start the process with schools by looking at their whole school approaches to supporting emotional wellbeing of both their pupils, their staff and their wider community. And we do this by working with schools on a quality standard and a resilience audit. And that's about looking at schools' approach to everything, really. We look at governance, we look at policy, we look at practice, and we go right the way down to the playground. and all of the schools in Middlesbrough, bar that one, are going through that process. Through the audit, the school might find some improvements that they want to make. It's a very self-evaluative process, a reflective process. It's not a horrible audit. And once the school has identified some improvements, they will then be awarded a one-off grant, which will be used to create a sustainable and lasting change within school. We also provide a range of training for staff and support. So we deliver academic resilience training regularly, and we also bring in other training programmes when they're identified by schools. We deliver a range of interventions, and they actually change dependent on the current funding profile that we have. But again, it is very low level interventions. It's that preventative approach, usually working with groups. And again, this might be quite useful for the children in care to use some of these materials at that very early stage, particularly when they're waiting for assessments. The best part of the programme, in my opinion, is the Head Start of Pupil Champions. And we've developed a local accredited training pathway. It's an ALSTAN programme. And basically it creates mental health experts within the pupil cohort. It's a pathway that supports them to be able to develop their skills so they can recognise their own mental health concerns, emotional wellbeing concerns. They can support their peers, they can deliver training, and they do projects within school. And today we have 1,057 Head Starters that have been trained up in Middlesbrough, and they range from very little year ones right the way up to year 13s. And once a year we bring all those pupil champions together and we have a lovely conference. Unfortunately, we can't do that this year. It's going to be virtual, and they can share their work with their peers. We get guest speakers in, and it's just a really good celebration for our schools. We provide a lot of information, advice and guidance to schools, and we have a new website which brings together all of the information for schools, for communities, for parents and for young people in a one-stop shop. And we do support community delivery with working with colleagues in the voluntary and community sector. So in terms of our COVID response, we were quite quick off the mark locally. Back in September, a local partnership came together, which comprised Tees, Esconway Valley NHS Trust, the Head Start team, Mind, the Junction and the Link, and we joined together to put an offer out to schools. What schools were telling us was that after lockdown 1, pupils were having difficulty settling into routines. There was some low-level anxiety around COVID and the dangers to themselves and their families. There was some issues with re-establishing relationships. So we pulled together a support offer for all schools. There was universal group work to do class sessions or assemblies. We did some targeted support for more vulnerable pupils. We provided staff training and wellbeing sessions because staff themselves were really, really anxious. We provided curriculum resources, and we also delivered parental support, and that was at a group. Since lockdown 3, we don't really know what the outcome's going to be for pupils returning to school next month. We do know that the most up-to-date research, which was done by NHS Digital, who have surveyed a variety of sources, have found that clinically significant mental health conditions have risen by approximately 50% compared to 2017. And we know that children from disadvantaged backgrounds and homes are twice more likely to have a probable mental health disorder. So I can imagine that the medium to long-term impact will be quite significant. In terms of the Head Start delivery in schools, this is only the Head Start team delivery, not the wider partnership. I have got the wider partnership statistics should the board require them, but this is purely from the Head Start team's perspective. We worked in 15 schools, or 788 pupils, so we had a really good take-up. Altogether in Middlesbrough, there was 37 schools who took advantage of the COVID response. 88% of pupils agreed that the sessions had been useful or very useful, which is a really good outcome. We also delivered a similar response in post-16 provision. So all 5 colleges in Middlesbrough accessed support, and we did a mix of organised groups which were looking at specific COVID issues, and we just did drop-ins as well, where students could just come in and talk about any concerns that they might have. So 144 students were reached, and 98% of them found them very, very useful. We also provided a lot of tutor resources, which 550 students benefited from. And we also have an online toolkit, which is based on resilience therapy. And it's specifically for post-16. It is useful for some year 10s and above, but specifically for our college students. So we had 108 visitors in the last month to that site. For school staff, there was a range of support offered. The Department for Education charged local areas with delivering some webinars around the return to school. The first webinar was all about staff wellbeing, and the second one was looking at some of the common issues that students might be presenting with. Myself and the educational psychology team delivered these. We didn't have a huge take up in Middlesbrough, only 22 attended. Strangely, in Redcar, we had 48, so there was quite a difference. But all of those that attended found it a really useful session. And we are following up with additional sessions right up until the end of this academic year. We put on a number of mental health drop-ins so that just an informal online meeting where schools could drop in, air any concerns they might have, or just have a talk really, because we found that we were getting a lot of calls from teachers, from head teachers down to classroom assistants, and we're really, really quite anxious. We've been delivering academic resilience sessions, so we're doing them virtually now, and actually I think it's better doing them virtually. We get a far higher attendance at those sessions. And we're providing lots and lots of curriculum resources, information for schools to use. We also do governor training, and that's around the new statutory guidance, the PHSE statutory guidance around mental health. And it's also about raising governors' awareness about the impacts of COVID on emotional wellbeing and some of the things that they should be looking at when they're at governors' meetings, some of the questions that they need to be asking. And as I've already mentioned, we've got our website, which is now packed solid of resources. Please take a look at it. You may need a password to get into some of the sections for schools, but just email me for that password. But everything that we do, all the resources that we use with schools, we then put on a website so that they can continue to use them. We also have a really good reach with social media. We produce a fortnightly newsletter, which has got everything that schools might need to know around emotional wellbeing and mental health. So it's all in one place, so they're not bombarded with loads of emails. Yes, so any further information can be found on the website. I've put the address there of our online resource. Please take a look at it. It's really good. I'd love your comments on it. And if anybody wants to know anything else about our core offer over and above the COVID offer, please don't hesitate to get in touch with me.
Thank you, Wendy. I'm aware of the time, so I'll just take a few questions, if necessary, 5 minutes worth of questions before I hand over to Carly, because we need to start on the next item on the agenda at least by past, and we have Victoria there waiting. So I will take any questions that you'd like to address to Wendy, please. Can I see any hands? No. Rebecca, you brushed your hair a bit. I thought it might be a question. So I can't see any questions there. Okay, if you get some later on, we might put them together with the questions that we might want to ask of both Carly and Wendy. So Carly, you're the service manager for 0 to 19 Healthier Together Middlesbrough. And would you like to talk to us now, please? And we'll take any questions at the end when Carly's finished talking to us. Thanks, Carly.
Thank you. So I've come to talk to you about our services involvement with looked after children and what our role is, and a little bit about some of the changes that we've made during the COVID response. So it kind of, I suppose, we fit in between the presentation what Nicola's given and what Wendy has given. We kind of have crossover with both. So following their initial health assessments, those review health assessment requests come into our service. And we also work closely with Wendy's team and Head Start as well. So we perform those review health assessments, and we've had some transformational change within our service as service improvement, kind of looking at how we can do things differently and how we can do things better. That's been fits in with the service improvement journey and relating to safeguarding. So in the past 6 months, we've now got a dedicated SCIFN, which is a specialist community public health nurse for looked after children. So this means that this is a very focused and specialist role. So those review health assessments for 5 to 19 are performed by one person. So there's some advantages to this in that when it's one person's responsibility and that's their specialist area, that we kind of can improve the quality of the assessments that we're carrying out. And we've also, it helps to give us some management oversight of what the issues are, because we're getting feedback from one person rather than kind of lots of people delivering those assessments. And it helps us to identify where the possibly are gaps in service and where things are working really well and where we need to do things a little bit differently. It also helps us with capacity within the wider team. So we, due to the safeguarding that we have within Middlesbrough, the team's very small, and we have had some very big challenges around kind of what our service can offer in a safe way. So we have, by having a dedicated nurse for looked after children, that means that they've always got that focus, all right, so that they prioritized. So safeguarding and looked after children are a priority for our service. We've had an increase in numbers over the past year. There has been an increase kind of year on year, and it had been a little bit of a spike and then it had come back down. So that means that there's more assessments to be carried out as well. And as I mentioned earlier, from the assessment, we'll look to see what's the identified health needs, what outcomes are we trying to achieve, and little goals would be set. And for all children, there would be certain things that you would be expecting, you know, as we expect of all of our own children, those things such as brushing your teeth and accessing the GP, accessing the dentist, accessing the GP for immunisations. These would be standard as part of their assessment. And then there'll be very specific items, very specific goals for children, where they would be identified and we would follow that up so the outcomes are not left unmonitored. We've had to adapt within the service with the changes due to COVID and infection control. So, you know, there has been at points over the past 12 months where assessments will have been offered virtually rather than in face-to-face, and that could be in relation to kind of staff in isolation, or it might be in that households in isolation, you know, that there's a close contact, and it's better for us to perform the assessment in some way and then maybe it's completed at a later date if there was something identified, than it not happen at all. So we've been really, really flexible, really adapt to kind of what I'll offer to what the needs of the children and young people are. So in terms of gaps, we have identified within the service, which is linked closely to children who are looked after, that, you know, we could strengthen our offer around special educational needs and also around that emotional support. So it's something that we are exploring, and we were successful in some grant funding for some additional posts. So I've worked closely with Wendy around the emotional resilience practitioner and how we can link in with the service so we don't have any duplication, about making sure that we get that correct practitioner to support that young person at the right time, very much fitting with that early identification and prevention where possible.
Thank you, Carly. That was a really comprehensive overview as well of your service, and it's very good. I like to see how you explained you link in with the service that Wendy works in and also with Nicola. So it's important that we all work together with Paula as well. So have we any questions for Carly? You must have explained everything to us, Carly and Wendy, that we haven't got any questions. Thank you for that. If anyone, is your hand up, Nicola? Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry, just come to me. Carly, that was really great, because I've been trying to get my head around your sort of restructures and stuff. That's been absolutely brilliant. Your point of contact is really useful from the point of view of the staff doing those. As part of your work, because obviously the failure point would be if that person's off any length of time, do you have contingency plans in place in case of that? Because I appreciate that you've got an excellent practitioner, but actually the fail-safe would be there if, you know, if that person was off sick for any length of time.
We certainly do, because the practitioner left a post. So, and it's continued, the service has continued. Somebody else was moved from within a generic 5 to 19 role into the Skiffon role for looked after children. And we have successfully appointed, we're just waiting for a start date for a new person to join us.
Great, lovely, thank you.
Thank you. That's very reassuring. Thank you for that question, Nicola. We just ticked that box. We've got the contingency plan in place. Thank you. So without further ado, and as I said, we're not having the Family Youth Justice Board briefing this evening. I will move on to the virtual school, where we're at the interim annual report and the COVID update. Thank you. So I'm going to hand over to Victoria, who is the virtual school's head. Is that okay, Victoria? Thank you.
Lovely, thank you, Chair. Is it possible to show the PowerPoint slides?
Yeah, I'll just pop them on the screen for you.
Thank you.
Can everybody see that?
Yeah, it's on my screen. Okay, thank you. So the virtual school are required to publish an annual report that is due out in March of every year. However, we feel that it's best practice to do an interim report around October, and that enables us to identify our strengths, our weaknesses, and where we need to develop. By doing it earlier in October and doing the interim report, it means that we can make those changes sooner within the next academic year, as opposed to having that delay until March. So we will bring out the finalised report in March. The key focus and purpose of the annual report is normally to report on the end of stage results, such as the stats results and GCSE results. As we know, we've done the report of the previous corporate parenting board, we're not reporting on those this year, so the full report will be very, very similar to this interim report. Although I do think it's really, really useful to give members.
Victoria, sorry, Chair. Susie, I think your mic's still open. It's providing a little bit of feedback.
Oh, sorry, I do apologise. Caroline, could it be possible for you to mute me? I'm unable.
Thank you, Susie. I was just going to wait for the next minute. Thanks, Rob, for helping us there. Thank you. Sorry, Victoria, to interrupt.
Thank you. So normally the focus of the annual report would be look at the end of key stage outcomes and then identify where they haven't been as good as we would like them to be and find out which KPI is responsible for that. Unfortunately, this year that isn't the case, so that isn't that focus. But we do know how our children did and we can identify those KPIs. So what I'd like to discuss with the board is the main strengths from the last academic year that we found, and then the development areas that we've been working on this year and will continue to do so as we move forward. Susie, could we have the next slide, please?
Could you remind the panel what the KPIs are, please, Victoria?
Sorry, it's the key performance indicators. So there are several things that will support a looked after child to do well, any child to do well in school, such as low exclusions, high attendance, and the amount of support that they get in school, identifying gaps within their education. So these are the things that we monitor as a virtual school to make sure that we're giving our children the best possible opportunity. Does that answer the question, Chair?
Yes, thank you. I just was wondering about the acronym, wondering if everybody else remembered the meaning. Thanks for that. Thank you.
Absolutely, thank you. So the main strengths of the virtual school that we found last year, and when Ofsted came in, they agreed with us that these were the main strengths, is that 98.6% of our looked after children had an up-to-date personal education plan. Now, just to put that in a little bit of context, going back to 2014, 30% of personal education plans were done within statutory frames. And at that point, we had to do them every 6 months. So not only have we increased that to a good percentage of 98.6%, we're actually doing more meetings and having more personal education plans. So I think that really is something to be proud of. We've also got arrangements in place. So when it came in that we had to do termly reviews of PEPs, we were very responsive to that, and there was no delay from that 6 months to termly transition. Actions and activities recorded in the PEP are carefully monitored. So we purchased something called Welfare Call. It's an electronic system where personal education plans that we refer to as PEPs are held. And this just means that they're a living live document. So designated teachers, social workers and virtual schools have access to this as a live document all of the time so that it's being monitored constantly. And that gives us as a virtual school the ability to pull live reports off as well. So we've got that higher level of monitoring that's there. We're also looking at our strengths regarding schools that are graded required improvements. Now, we wouldn't want to put our looked after children in schools that are RI for many different reasons, but partly around the high quality teaching. But we also want to make sure that we maintain education stability. It's a really key important thing. So if a child becomes looked after and they're in a school that has an RI Ofsted, then we make sure that we complete that within the personal education plan, that support package is there. We've had sight of that Ofsted and we put additional support in so that I'm reassured that even though that child is in a school that's rated RI, we can keep that education stability, but making sure that we're still providing that high quality education for that young person so they're not disadvantaged. We're also really good at the attendance monitoring. So again, through Welfare Call, we've got a really, really good, robust system. They are a company who phone up schools every day to find out if our child was there for morning registration and afternoon registration. So anytime I can go and look at a child as a live attendance, as if we were a real physical school, and I've got access to that information, which is really, really useful. Progress and attainment was monitored and evaluated. So again, through the Welfare Call system, we can pull off those reports of where the children's progress and attainment is. And we also ask schools to complete a termly return of attainment. So we can make sure that on a cohort and individual level that we're able to monitor and evaluate that. Attainment and progress and attendance are reported regularly at the virtual school governing body. So Rob Brown is the chair of that, and we have Mika and obviously yourself, Chair, who are governors within that, along with schools, and Wendy from health. And all of those KPIs get reported to the governing body to hold virtual school accountable for where we are, and also to work together as a group to remove any barriers to looked after children's education. So that's not something that we statutorily have to do, but it is really good practice, and we do that. All of the details of educating settings are up to date. So one of our statutory responsibilities as a virtual school, and where we kind of get the name from, is that we are responsible for ensuring we hold that information on young people so we know which school they're attending, and that is in place and done really well. And that the Pupil Premium Plus policy, so that's the amount of money that is given to the virtual school in order to support looked after children within their education, and that policy is published. That's also held within the annual report, and it's something that we have to report on every year. It's also on the virtual school website. Another one of our responsibilities is ensuring that appropriate training is available for designated teachers, for all school staff, social workers, carers, and actually independent reviewing officers. You can see within the body of the report that we've completed all of this training, and actually COVID's had quite a positive impact. So I think it's enabled stakeholders to attend training better than it has done previously, because there's no travelling. At the end of the day, they can just log in and it's there. And you know, I'm aware sometimes they may be doing their emails, but it's better that they're there for some of it and doing some emails in the background than not attending it at all. So I think we're getting a really good turnout for that. We've also done some national training on attachment aware trauma informed, which I think was really positive. And it was really good to use the online forum to be able to deliver that. Because as we know, our looked after children aren't just attending Middlesbrough schools, they can attend schools nationally. So it's really important that we push that message wherever we can. In the event where a child is excluded, there are arrangements in place for education. So a school will inform us, or we can have a look through the attendance and I will get an alert that child has a fixed term exclusion. If it's more than one day, we contact the school and we arrange for a tutor to educate that child. So even though they're not physically in the building, they're still getting that education, so they're not missing out. And I think we are the only virtual school in the country who does that, as to my knowledge. We are the only virtual school in the country to offer that. And there has also been no permanent exclusions for the past 4 years, I believe now, which is fantastic. And that's with the co-working and the collaboration that we've had with our schools and the positive relationships we have. Thank you, Susie. So moving on to the areas of development, and some of these we have made some traction on, and others we've had COVID, which has caused some complications, as it has, I believe, to most services. So one of the things was the variability about the quality of personal education plans. The difficult impact of this is that the cycle is once every term, and that's when we can review it every term. So there's a few months delay within seeing the impact of any interventions that we put in place. When Ofsted came in, we were at 55% good or better within the quality of personal education plans. Each month I will do a dip sample of 20 PEPs, and at the moment that's sitting between 68% and 80% for good or better. We've also tweaked the quality assurance tool in order to make sure that our PEPs are of a better standard. I've looked at other tools from other virtual school heads, and I believe ours is, we've got high standards. So when we say that our PEPs are good, we're really reassured that good means good. We're also looking at adding additional QA systems on top of that. So Paula is now part of our QA, and every month we've got partners who will come in and they will also do quality assurance of PEPs, just to make sure that I'm not biased and saying my PEPs are really good quality. And we've got other stakeholders in there. And we're also looking at approaching another virtual school head and the possibility of them having an external eye on the quality of our PEPs as well. And I'm also looking into having a peer review from the National Association of Virtual School Heads, who will also look at that quality assurance of PEPs, just to give everyone reassurance that it is a real key priority and we are making progress with that. The other area of development was that an emergency placement to ensure that PEPs were initiated within 10 working days of a child becoming looked after. I can now report that we are the best in the country at this. So it is done within 10 working days, and there's no other virtual school who's meeting that as well as we are. So I'm quite proud that we've pushed that on. In emergencies, ensure that new education is in place. We've got 20 school days. If a child moves from Middlesbrough down to Cumbria, we've got 20 days to make sure that they've got education in place. Now, COVID has caused us some complications with things like bubbles and reintroducing children into schools. However, what we've been able to do is do that online learning so that there's no gap in that education, and we've been able to deliver that quite swiftly. For 16 to 18-year-olds, we need to liaise with the personal advisor to ensure educational goals and needs are understood. So in September, we launched a post-16 pathway so that everybody's really clear, including young people and personal advisors, what the expectations around for post-16 PEPs are. And at the moment, I think we're standing at around 98% of post-16 PEPs are completed. Where they haven't been, it's normally because a young person has said that they don't want to engage in that process, or it's where sometimes we have missed an episode, so they've missed that meeting and it's been rearranged. The next one was to ensure that all children are receiving their appropriate elements of education. So this is around making sure that they've got the 25 hours worth of education, or if they're not able to access 25 hours, we've got a really secure plan around that. So there has been a significant drop, and I know, Chair, you were at Virtual School Governing Body where you saw the evidence and the KPIs of that drop. We're not at zero, which is where we would like to be, but we are getting there. I think there is an issue with looked after children coming into care with no education placements. For example, one young person was electively home educated, and as a looked after child, we'd be looking to get them a school placement. So those are the type of barriers that we come up against with that. The next one is to work closely with partners, including social care, to improve school placement stability. I think we've made quite good headway on this. We now have a school move policy. It's really, really clear. School moves have reduced. One of the barriers that we're currently facing is when it's in court, and I'm currently challenging 2 cases to ensure that court understand the importance of placement school stability, so that we're not moving a child from one Middlesbrough school to another Middlesbrough school and the impact that that has on their education. But it's no longer a challenge within the local authority, it's now getting external parties to understand that, and I think that is tremendous progress that we've made there. To work creatively with schools and carers to continue to improve academic outcomes at all key stages. I think COVID's been a challenge, and I think we've risen to that challenge. We've built some really strong relationships with schools. We now, as you can see in the body of the report, we've had foster carer coffee mornings. I went to a foster carer conference, and we are starting to work better and more jointly, which is nice to see. There's a foster carer education pack that's currently in the middle of getting published. So every foster carer will receive a pack explaining all the different key stages, what a personal education plan is, and also the contact details of the virtual school should they have any questions, and every other key stakeholder that they would need to be in contact with. So increase attendance and training for social workers. I think it's no secret, I don't know, Sue, if, Paula, you've got a view on this, but I think there's been an issue around caseloads and the accessibility for social workers to attend training. That barrier is starting to remove now. We're starting to see more social workers attend training. I've been working with the new principal social worker, Siobhan Davies, in order to put a programme of training in. So we're quite confident come this coming year, we should be able to pick that up with some pace. So we've also got improved attendance and reduced persistent absenteeism. Paula and I work together really closely, again, through that welfare call system and those children having those phone calls, we can identify really quickly those children where the absence becomes an issue. We have identified that it tends to be children who are placed with parents under a care order, and it's about working with those parents, and Paula and I are working really closely to pull those down. The impact of that is really difficult to see at the moment due to COVID and the lockdown, and we'll be able to see that and evidence that later on in the year when children return on the 8th of March. The other thing that we want to do is reduce the number of fixed term exclusions. Over the past 2 or 3 years, there has been a slow decline. During the COVID period, I think last term we had 1 fixed term exclusion. However, I do think that because children haven't been at school, or less children are at school, and the children are getting more support when they're in there, this has been the reason for that significant decline. But we need to keep an eye on that and try and keep those numbers really, really low. We want to increase the number of children who are accessing mainstream school. What's becoming really apparent is actually when we're getting into that critical key stage, so key stage 4, so year 10 and year 11, we're finding that children are going into alternative provisions, and quite often that means that young people can't access those GCSEs. So we're working really, really hard to keep those children within a mainstream school and give them the best opportunity to sit GCSEs, and also working with alternative provisions to provide GCSEs. So we are working on that. That is a goal, and also to decrease the number of children who are not in education, training or employment. This has been a rising issue, but the numbers are starting to come down. We do have a task and finished group to look at the strategic overview of how we can bring those figures down, working jointly with social care and other external bodies. And again, Chair, that was shared at the virtual school governing body, and I'm more than happy to bring that to corporate parent board should you feel that's appropriate. Okay, so that's our main areas of development. Thank you. So attendance, on the very first day when the third lockdown was announced, it was a decision from Middlesbrough that all children would be expected to attend school unless there was a clear medical reason. I know Paula has been working relentlessly in the background. There's some very difficult caveats within the attendance when we come to a lockdown and lots of different codes, which I'm quite happy to go into should anybody want to. But I know Paula's been working really hard to do risk assessments on those children who haven't been able to go into school, and we've been working really hard to identify those children who are not in school. So that has been going on in the background. We contacted all foster carers to make sure that laptops, children have access to laptops. There was a couple of occasions where they haven't, and we've gone in and we've challenged, or we've been able to purchase them and get them really quickly. At the moment, trying to source high volumes of laptops is quite difficult due to supply and demand, but we have been able to meet that. So as far as I am aware, every child who needs access to a laptop who isn't attending school does have access to one, or can contact us to make sure that they do have one. I think it was really important that given some of our children are at home within foster care placements, that we don't forget about our foster carers. Now, I have children myself who are at home. Trying to juggle work and homeschooling is really, really difficult, and it is a challenge. And sometimes you do need that external support. So we've been holding weekly coffee mornings. I've also made sure that I've got a bit tech savvy. I've joined Facebook, and I'm part of the foster carer Facebook page. And I do regular in the know posts, so things about the difference between remote education, what the different attendance code means, and just answering general questions that foster carers may have, making sure that they know who I am, how they can contact me, and that I can signpost them should they need it. And just making sure that we're keeping all the updated resources online. So that's what we've been doing during this lockdown. And I think that's the presentation from me. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much, Victoria. I think we're all a bit taking a minute to get our breath back after all of that activity. I think we're exhausted just listening to it, actually, but it's excellent. And I'd like to thank you very much for that. We are quite a trailblazing local authority by the sound of it, in that we're at the head of the game in one or two areas at least that you mentioned. So I'm very proud that we can share that we're ahead. I think that it's marvellous that we haven't had any permanent exclusions for over 4 years. I think that it's a great idea to engage with peers across the country as virtual school heads to share best practice and share ideas. And I think it was very interesting to note your awareness of the issues of self-improvement on that journey, and that you seem to have everything in place and you're aware of where we're going. So thank you for that. I think that was an excellent overview of all the issues related to our virtual school. So has anyone any questions? When you've got your breath back, I'm still, oof, it's exhausting that jog through all of that information. I can see Councillor Wright and Councillor Higgins. So Craig, if you want to go first, please.
Thanks, Chair, and thank you as well, Victoria, for your leadership of the virtual school. It's brilliant to see such improvement, and I think if we reflect on where the Ofsted report found that the virtual school is not effective, the fact that you've turned it in such a short amount of time is really brilliant. I'd like to do some digging, if I can, on the fixed term exclusions issue. So one of the areas that our Ofsted report highlights is that there was not enough challenge of those fixed term exclusions for looked after children. If we look at, say, if we look at those fixed term exclusions that are in the report pack, could you outline any challenge that was done by the virtual school against those fixed term exclusions?
Yeah, absolutely, Councillor Wright. So one example would be coming back from the last lockdown, one of our young people went into school and they were smoking a cigarette. They had previously said that they were having anxiety about coming back to school and went to school with the intention of having a fixed term exclusion. They were blowing smoke in the teacher's face, and because of the new appendix of COVID for the exclusions, the school actually excluded them for 5 days. So we initially went straight in there, we did a challenge, we wrote to governors, we gave them the new virtual school fixed term exclusions protocol and the support that they should be doing, and we did that challenge, and that was reduced and the child was supported, and it actually avoided a permanent exclusion. All schools are now aware of what our policy is, and they do know if you exclude a looked after child for more than 5 days, I'll be writing to your governors.
Really good.
I think that answers your question, Councillor Wright, does it?
Yeah, so really good. Thank you for that really clear evidence of challenge. Just out of interest, how many students are currently dual registered in order to prevent a permanent exclusion?
Off the top of my head, I can think of 2. However, I'm not confident to give you that as an overall statistic, but I'm happy to get that to you, Councillor Wright.
Yes, thank you. And thank you as well for your answers tonight. Really good. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Wright. So Councillor Higgins, Teresa, and then I can see Mr. Snowball. Carl, I'll take your question after Teresa. Thanks, Councillor Higgins.
Thanks, Chair. Thank you very much, Victoria. That was an excellent presentation and gave us lots and lots of information. And I agree with Craig about how you've improved that service, because you have. And it's absolutely brilliant. And I have no hesitation to congratulate you and the people that you work with on behalf of the children, looked after children. So thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll be sure to pass that on to the rest of the team who work really, really hard in the background. And again, my social care colleagues who are on this call who've supported that journey as well.
Thank you. Thank you, Teresa. Thanks, Victoria. So over to Mr. Snowball. Carl.
Yeah, Victoria, I think in the wider document that was circulated, I was quite surprised really in that I think it said something like 50% of the children are placed in Middlesbrough schools and 50% are external to Middlesbrough schools. I was just wondering if you took that sort of boundary to, if you like, a Tees Valley boundary, what that percentage would mean, and what really the challenges are if the child is further afield geographically, and how you overcome those.
Thank you, Victoria.
Yeah, thank you for that. So you're right, there is kind of what we refer to as a donut effect. So you have like the central children who are in Middlesbrough and then the Tees Valley area. And that does change and it is transient, but it's around 75%. I know since Sue's come into leadership, there's been a big drive about getting our young people back closer to home. So that's forever increasing and getting higher and higher. So we're getting more and more young people back in. Challenges for young people who are educated outside of area. I think sometimes there is that delay in making sure that we get that appropriate education. So it normally involves contacting the virtual school head and that local authority and their understanding of their schools and the best place for our child. So for example, if the virtual school head from Cheshire was to ring me up, I could say, yep, give me an overview of the needs of that child. This school would be really, really good match. So sometimes there is that barrier waiting for that response. As far as monitoring goes, because we've got that online system, once we've got a child into a school, we have dedicated PEP advisors who's that main link with that school, so they can be contacted at any time. So once a child in, there's very little disadvantage to being educated in area or out of area for their education. It is that initial identification of the appropriate setting, Mr. Snowball.
Thank you, Victoria. Is that okay, Mr. Snowball?
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, thank you.
Okay. Rob, would you like to come in with anything as Director of Education and Chair of the Virtual School Governing Body? And then I'll take your question, Councillor Walker.
Thank you. I'm just trying to unmute. I keep leaning on it and take myself off. I am being heard though. Can just someone give us a nod? Yeah, okay. So the board has been on a bit of a journey, but I just really need to make it clear that we're still on that journey and there's quite some way to go. So there is some early grass shoots or green shoots that Victoria's described. The plan will continue for the foreseeable future, and we'll keep the board updated. So I think the board are right to receive this well. So there is some good news there, but there is a journey to travel. So the importance that this board has a good grasp of what needs to improve and put that challenge in future meetings as well, which I'm sure, Chair, will be the case, and looks like that is the format going forward. But we do need to keep a close eye on this, and as Councillor Wright raised, that kind of interface between education and social care, but education in a broader sense of schools as well, and the placement within schools. So virtual school is there to champion, and then we're there to hold that virtual school to account within this group. So hopefully it's been received well today. I think it has largely, and then the next iteration we need to see more of them improvements on that plan.
Thank you, and I have total confidence in Victoria to take us along that path of improvement. Thank you. And it was Councillor Walker now. Jeanette.
Thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. One of the things I'm curious about, if you wouldn't mind, I mean, I don't know how relevant that is at the moment, about school transport and about the problems and issues that foster carers have regarding getting their children to school if they're outside the area. I mean, have there been problems with the school transport situation during COVID? I don't know. If not, or if there has been, have we managed to actually overcome those problems?
Thank you. Victoria, would you like to answer that question?
Thank you, Chair. There has been a few anomalies, but on the whole, it has been okay. One of them, for example, is where a placement broke down and a child had moved to Darlington. So to maintain that stability, we actually contacted Home to School Transport and put in a taxi and an escort with them in order to support that until we come to more normal times. But on the whole, Councillor Walker, I think everything seems to have been okay with just one or two cases.
Thank you for that. Thanks for raising that, Jeanette. So we have, I just thought we might spend the last one. We have about 10 minutes left. So I'd like to move on to any other business. And I'd be grateful if I could ask Sue to quickly give us an introduction to the poster that Susie might share with us, please, about the Philomena Protocol.
Thank you, Chair. Just to say, really, we've been talking really in some depth today about children's education and about children's health, and our vulnerable looked after children. And there are, I think, two things that are more important to help a child thrive. So it's been a really good discussion, and I've enjoyed it. So thank you very much. I feel slightly, what's the right word? A bit of a fraud here, really, because we've got Deb Fenny on the call, who will be probably far more familiar with the Philomena Protocol than I am. So I don't know whether, Deb, all I was going to do is talk through the poster. So would you like to do it and I'll chip in from the background? We could do a double act.
Is that okay, Deb? I just wanted this poster to be an introduction to a broader discussion later on when the new procedures will be more embedded. So this was simply an awareness raising session. So if the peer review would like to work together on this, I'll be very happy to listen. Thank you.
Okay, well, carry on, Deb. No, you carry on.
I will make some apologies because obviously the Philomena is not mine, it is DCI pages. But the Philomena Protocol was brought in more recently in January, as he explained at the previous meeting. But I'll let you scroll down. Do you want to scroll down the poster for us, please? Thank you. As you can see there, it's obviously a police initiative to help locate safely the return of young people. There's a lot of work ongoing in Cleveland Police at the minute around missing people and those that are more at risk of missing, some of which are in local authority care. And the Philomena Protocol, as previously explained, I'm not sure who was at the previous meeting, is a process that gives us a quick kind of turnaround to react to those that go missing. So we already have information in our database, and we can database within the Force Control Room, which allows us to be alerted to go to places far more quicker than We previously were where we would go out to a care home or we'd go out to somebody's home and we'd sit and take some details, and that could take an hour or so, whereas we have the information readily available to us, and our systems allow us to look back relatively quickly to go out to the key areas that these children have been missing from before, their families, their relatives, friends, locations of interest, etc. I don't know if you've got any more to add on to that, Sue?
I think in terms of children and young people who are looked after, they are often, the most vulnerable. And I know that, I chair the risk management group where I have oversight of the young people who are, at the most risk of harm. And there's usually sort of it's often about 5 young people who I feel as DCS I need to have absolute oversight of. And I think it's particularly important in those circumstances. I mean, they young people unfortunately can go missing quite frequently. They may be outside of Middlesbrough, and I think having that information. One of the things I'm trying to do, Deb, is make sure that our children who are placed in children's homes outside of Middlesbrough are aware of the Philomena protocol, which I'm not sure that they are. And I think it's a really good protocol. I think it needs to be out there much more. So I want a children's home or wherever to have this on file. I want them to send it to the local police force, so that they have this information. So I think it's a really good way, not just of having, well, I think it's a really good protocol, but to actually, I think those first couple of hours before a child gets on a train back to Middlesbrough, for example, or where a child, is getting into somebody's car. I'm making these examples up, colleagues, by the way.
No.
I think that those first hours that you can actually save by the fact that that information is already there is absolutely golden and is absolutely pertinent to protecting and in this, talking in this scenario, are very vulnerable looked after children. So that's particularly one reason why I wanted to raise it here today, Chair. I think as part of some of Sean Page's presentations going forward, we talk about it more, but I think it's something that has the real possibility, and it's already starting to do so, safeguard some of these very vulnerable adolescents.
Thank you for that, Deb and Sue. And I would like to come back to this with Sean at a later stage, but this was to would you mind scrolling down, Sue? We did get the questions and the other issues on the bottom of the poster, didn't we, earlier? So as you saw, probably, there is information there, questions about the form and about how it might be used and how to help locate missing people. So are there any quick questions on this awareness raising session for Deb or Sue, please, from the panel? I can't see many hands now, so you might have to call out.
Can I come in, Chair?
Yes, of course, Teresa. Councillor Higgins.
I do think it's important that all schools have this, all homes have this, where the looked after children are, and also foster carers. So I think we need to know as a council if children are going missing, how often, where are they going to, and how long it's going to take to get them back. I think it's vital that it is vital that we need to know where they are and when they are missing. Not 3 weeks down the line, but immediately. So,
thank you.
Thank you.
I think
Can I just come back on that, Councillor Halawi?
Yes, and then Paula would like to come in after you, Sue. So when you finish, Paula will come in.
Paula will probably say it better than me because she might be trying to say the same thing. We do have quite a rigorous process in-house to look at our looked after children and when they go missing, in fact, wider than looked after children. And I get a regular report. It's like a staged approach. So when children have been missing for a certain length of time, I get a report as DCS. This is really about finding them rather than telling us that they're going missing, because, it's about actually getting them home quicker. So I think that, and I'm pretty happy to talk to you, offline about what we do to make sure our children who are going missing are are looked for, but also we have what we call return home interviews. So we offer each young person who's gone missing an interview, not always taken up, to just talk about why they went, where they went to, are there anything that they're worried about, those sorts of interviews. A bit of a formal name, I'd rather call it, I don't know, chat, something like that, so that we try and learn as much as we possibly can. Paula, you'll probably say all of that much better.
Paula?
No, I was just wanting to bring this to life a little bit, because this weekend there was a specific incident that I was involved with a very vulnerable, looked after person who did go missing. And over the weekend we were able to use Future for Families police analysts to pull together information about where this young person was known to visit, people that they were associated with, any involvement that the local authority had about places that they'd been found before, and we were able to pull it into a really comprehensive missing plan that then went to the home. The staff at the home then completed it with things that they knew about this young person, additional vulnerabilities, and it allowed the police to locate the young man and return him home safely. So following that, like Sue's mentioned, our missing team will go out and do a return home interview, and the social workers will continue to add to that missing plan, so that the police constantly have up-to-date information about, if he does go missing, what are the vulnerabilities, who needs to do what, and where is he most likely to be found.
Thank you, Paula. That seems to be tying up a lot of ends there. I'll bring on Mr. Snowball, and then Kay Darg, I'll bring you in after Mr. Snowball. So Carl, your turn.
I think Paul has probably just answered some of what I was going to bring in, but I'm guessing the form as a protocol needs to have some, well, a sharpness to it, because when it's going to be looked at, you want it to sort of jump out of the pages to where the child might have been or associating with. My worry is that, well, one is how would I as a foster carer feed into that form, and how much of it is, if you like, hearsay that I might have heard, and how much is it fact, and what goes into that form, hearsay or fact, for it to still remain sharp. That's a fair question.
Thank you. Paula, do you want to answer that, since you've been recently engaged in that?
So foster carers' contributions are going to be critical, because they're going to have really valuable information, and it doesn't need to be factual. Actually, it could be intelligence, and the police would pick that up and use it to inform their inquiries. And so absolutely, I don't know if that answers your question.
Is that okay, Carl?
Yeah, it's fine.
I think it does, yeah. I saw Kay, would you like to come in now, please? Thank you, Kay Darg.
Thank you. Yes, Chair. It was just to come back on a couple of points, just to assure the board that we do robustly monitor and track our young people who go missing from home and care. And we also look at those who go repeatedly missing. So we look at those who go missing 3 and 30 days. And just another point to come back on was in relation to the return home interviews, we have a duty to conduct those interviews within 72 hours, or to offer an interview within 72 hours. And we do, and I monitor that performance quite robustly as well. And we do have a high percentage offered, and we also have a high percentage that are undertaken as well, often almost 90% most months. So it's just to offer that assurance to the board that that happens. And also the information that's gathered from those return home interviews does then subsequently go into and inform the safety plan for the children.
That's really useful. Thank you. That's very useful to know that, Kay. Thank you for that input.
Thank you.
I'm aware of the time. So I think that we will be coming back to this issue of the Philomena Protocol, along with many other issues that we've discussed this evening that have been very useful. I know that Susie was going to show us the action plan, but we can defer that, Susie, if you're in agreement, to our next meeting, because obviously we'll update some of the actions based on tonight's meeting. So we'll incorporate those ideas. My final plea was for elected members to please sign up to Spotlight 2, where we would like to know which area of the corporate parenting strategy, which area you would like to sign up to, whether it be your home, your work, your education, your health, etc., so that we can move forward putting together the plan for Spotlight 2 and bring everyone together to talk about some details. So please send your ideas to Susie which area of the corporate parenting strategy you would like to work in with other professionals to produce ultimately a spotlight report, which is actually a task and finish report that some people call it. So if everyone's, I'm looking around, I can't see any hands or anything outstanding. It is now 17:58, I believe. So it's a good job that we split the February Corporate Parenting Board meeting into 2 meetings. Otherwise, it would have been a very long one meeting. Everybody's nodding there. I think we're doing the maths. We might have been there till 8 o'clock or something. But I think it's been a very, very interesting and useful Corporate Parenting Board meeting tonight. I feel very well informed across numerous areas, as I'm sure you all do. And I would very much like to thank our presenters for all their research and presentations. Very well done to everyone. And thank all of you for attending, and thank you for your questions. So I look forward to meeting you again on the 17th of March. And we will once again discuss in detail some of the really interesting issues in supporting our Middlesbrough's children. So thanks everyone. Have a lovely rest of the evening, and I'll see you soon. Thank you.